Got it.
Well, recording is in progress. Thanks so much for joining us. Today, our very special guest is Mr. Marc Gauvin. I do want to thank you, Marc, for joining us here. As you know, or as I've explained to you, this is a regular conversation with Andrew Weeks Jr., but today we're having Wednesday conversation with Marc Gauvin. And for our audience, let me tell you that today's topic will be a resolution towards risk without austerity. It's being now live streamed Wednesdays at 8 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time. I'm sorry, Pacific Standard Time, at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's also being live streamed to the Facebook group AHIABGA-TV Network. So Marc Gauvin, project coordinator, a formal semantics, stability, and money expert, a 34-year veteran of the new money movement, known for promoting money as a standard measure, applying formal dynamic systems engineering, semantic analysis, and general IT theory to money systems. Marc is the founder of the Passive BIBO Currency Project in collaboration with Sergio Dominguez and fellow of the Monetary Research Center of the University of National and World Economy, where, along with Jorge Meira Costa, presented a proposal for harmonizing current disparate scientific and legal definitions of money towards greater decidability in the provision of justice according to universal principles of contract law, following previous publications. Marc is an international IT expert as well as Director of Operations and Business Strategy. On behalf of the Spanish authors community and in collaboration with Jaime Delgado, he spearheaded Media Value Chain Ontology. That's ISO IEC 21000-19, international standard, approved and published in 2010 for representing the digital media value chains, as well as managing and directing publicly funded projects. Marc has participated in numerous international conferences as a speaker and presenter on digital rights, as well as on passive BIBO currency theory. He is a musician, painter, and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Integrated Sciences from Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. You can reach Marc at bibocurrency.org. And so with that, Marc, we're going to turn it over to you. Please, from this point, introduce your topic, and please give us a definition of the acronyms I've used so our public will have an idea of what we're talking about. Marc, the floor is yours.
Okay. I think to summarize the introduction, I can't remember all the acronyms you mentioned.
Well, BIBO is where I wanted to start.
Okay, yeah. So BIBO is the way it's pronounced, and basically refers to bounded input, bounded output, and that is, let's say, the property of a system in order to determine that it is its stability status. In other words, if the system has a bounded input and a bounded output, for most systems, I'll add just this point, for most systems that are or can be modeled as linear time invariant. That's an important distinction, but that is a pretty broad array of most systems that human beings have to deal with. So there are exceptions to this, but in general, and the money systems is absolutely a linear time invariant system. So as such, you can determine, if you can understand the system and think of its inputs and outputs, you can determine whether the system is stable or not if it adheres to that principle. If the system's inputs are bounded and its outputs are also bounded, or put another way, for every bounded output, there's a bounded input. This means it's kind of actually quite intuitive. We think about it, that for any input, if you push something, and it has a reaction, if that reaction is limited in time, then the system can find its own equilibrium again on its own without having to interfere with it. So anyway, that theory is being applied in a novel way to money systems. And the reason for that is because money systems are not conceived or managed with any kind of objective framework.
Right.
In other words,
but just a moment, Mark. So take your time, slow down. We're in no rush.
Sure.
But now what I'm doing is sharing your website, because there you have Money Systems Transparency Alliance. And today's topic is, as I understand it, a resolution for risk without austerity. So please, for your website, or if you'd like to share your screen, let's give people first an introduction overview of who you are, what this is about, and then we can dig into the details, if that's okay with you.
Sure, perfect. So essentially, this is an offshoot of the BIBO Currency Project. So the BIBO Currency Project was basically, as I was explaining before, applying dynamic systems engineering to money systems. And then we arrived at certain fundamental conclusions that we thought we could communicate to the world. And those conclusions really are captured in our resolutions. So if you go up to the top of the page,
let me go back here.
If you go up to the top there, you see. So if you do MSTA resolutions, right, here, if you go down just a little while, we just say, so these 2 points are we capture pretty much the whole spirit. So after the preamble, which people can gather from our discussion today, but essentially we find that in the first point is that money is not formally defined. So it's not a natural phenomena that exists thanks to some kind of a hidden natural law that we have to discover yet. It's something that we invented, and therefore we have to define it. The first point is that we discover yet. It's something we invented.
I'm sorry, go ahead. I put myself on mute.
Okay, have we got it? Hello?
Yes, pretty good. I had another device going. Back to you, Mark. Sorry.
Okay. So, so the first point is that money is not formally defined or nor specified, and it needs to be because it's a human-made system. So if we want to create this system called money, we have, and we've been using it, but if we want it to work properly, we have to define it properly in an open, transparent way, and taking everyone into consideration. This is a project that's never been done in history.
Slow down, Mark. There is no rush. So please take your time. Take a breath.
This hasn't been done in history before, and it needs to be done. So the second point is that this is more urgent and more immediate. And that is that we need to do something about the behavior of the current money system, because it's not a passive system, it's an active system. It affects our behavior, it affects everything. We need to make it passive if we're going to use money as a valid reference of value. So those are the 2 points that are really the center of the MSTA.
Good, just a moment. Now let's go back to number 1. Money can be formally defined and specified by all interested parties and stakeholders through the appropriate open multidisciplinary international forum. May I click on this link for more information?
It's a lengthy presentation, but yeah, sure. I mean, if we want to talk about that is
well, at least to allow our audience to get a taste of what it is.
Sure.
And then we can go back to, if that's okay with you.
No, that's fine.
Yes, slowly loading, so we'll have to wait for the process to happen. I do have this downloaded. I just didn't have it ready, Mark, so I apologize.
There it is.
Okay. So let me go ahead and I'll take the step of downloading it, and so I can have a better option to show the entire screen. Just a moment, please. Showing folder. Okay, can you see my screen now?
I can see your screen perfectly, yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, so this really doesn't look like it's too many. Could you maybe walk us through this diagram? Would that give us, our audience, a little better idea, or can you walk us through this?
Well, a little bit, but then I would have to, if you want to move the slides.
Of course, I'll be happy to do so.
And close the edit PDF files thing that you have.
Okay, just a moment here.
Dismiss.
On my screen is not showing. Hold on, let me stop sharing and start again. Just a moment. And we try it again.
Do you want me to share it?
Oh yeah, please. If you could be so kind, I'd appreciate that, Mark.
Yes. Okay. Let me see if I can get that. So let's see if you allow me to. Yes, you do. So, so I'm going to go to. Right. So I can go here. Okay, there we are. Can you see that?
Excellent. Yes, thank you so much. Yes.
Okay, so this was a project that we set up to try and get money to do this. It's a very involved project that's basically set up in a format following pretty much the experience that I had the luck to partake in, and that's development of international standards. So using basically the way standards are developed, we thought of doing this, right, as a project because of the problem. So we state the problem that is at the core of all this, and that is the fact that people really don't know what money is. I mean, people have their own kind of notion of money, an intuitive notion, but they do not. There is no kind of ratified notion of money. So we have this little process at MSTA in the introduction that basically asks people to think about it, you know, and if is what you think money is. Have you thought? I mean, you may have a notion of what money is, but you maybe never thought, is that notion logically valid or not? You just accept it because that's by osmosis or whatever, or by tradition or whatever. And so if you have this notion, if you think it's largely valid, then the next question you must ask is that notion that's logical in my mind, how do I know if that's common to everyone else? You know, and the final point is that to really know that it's common, you can think it's logical, the idea you have of money is logical, but you can only know it's really common if it's been published or ratified someplace. So you can say, okay, these group of people have determined that this is what money is. So that when I speak of money, they've developed a rational and rigorous definition of money, right? This has never really been done. It's never been ratified. And economic theories, basically much every theory develops its own framework. It's not even a common framework. And we say that this has to end. The world has to be able to specify exactly what money is if it's going to be used formally in contracts or you know, using applied mathematical equations and all that.
Right.
All this, we have to know what the unit is, right?
Yes.
But what we have also identified is that in absence of any real formal specification or a definition or specification of money, we find that people have a notion of money. But when we analyze that notion, and that notion we really dug out of contracts, because the letter of the contracts pretty much says this, is that the notion people have really conflates two concepts. So one concept is money as a record, a measure, record of value, and the other is as money as a token of trade, right? And if you analyze that logically in a formal kind of sense, as you would developing a IT application, you will find that those two notions are mutually exclusive logically, and that is a problem, right?
Right.
And so we have this thing called money that everybody uses, and it's not been represented properly. And we refer to that incongruence as a misrepresentation in the sense that it's logically incongruent, and therefore anybody who uses that notion is participating in a misrepresentation, because something that is illogical cannot be a valid representation.
Right.
So we talk about why we need the standard, because money is a big problem for a lot of people. A lot of people are excluded, and there's through the use of money and the management of money, there is a very high concentration of wealth in a small number of people. And so we point that out, and then we also talk about whose fault is it. And what we're referring to here is simply that it's pretty much everyone's responsibility to deal with this, but it's very important for the small and medium sized enterprises to become aware of this problem, because they're the next on the line to be, if they're not already being eliminated, from any kind of any kind of importance in the economy. And who's at fault? Well, that's another concept, but I think that's a nice introduction to the problem. And the rest of the presentation talks about the details of all that is involved in trying to set up this kind of multidisciplinary standards development, governance of the project, the different types of general sections, because we have one section which is
well, could you just walk us through it, Mark?
Okay, I'll do it quickly. So our view is, so we really don't want to play the whose fault, because pretty much the world, and we're all participating in this game unwittingly, mostly. Even experts don't really know that this is really the problem. So it's or a problem, or a serious problem. So we're not that way. We're just trying to solve that problem for everybody, because everybody wins when we solve this problem.
Right.
We also mentioned that there is a certain amount of legal liability in dealing with this, because, like I said before, money is included in contracts, and therefore any kind of misrepresentation in contracts has liabilities. If people are winning from that, or if they think that they're gaining advantage over others by way of a misrepresentation, that's a problem, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a legal incentive and imperatives to get involved.
Right.
And, the real incentives and imperatives is the greater transparency, i.e. reason trumps demagoguery. The judiciary must correct misrepresentation or lose credibility. In other words, if we confront the judiciary and say, hey, we have a problem that we've already tried, we're starting to conceptually frame it into where we would, the United States has an interesting approach, which is called first impression, which means a legal matter that doesn't have any precedence. So the judges on principle of law have to deal with it somehow. So the judiciary must correct the misrepresentation. And if it doesn't, then it itself loses credibility. And everybody is required, because everybody's got their, involved in one contract or another with money, and everybody's involved and required to help resolve any ambiguity in a contract. Somebody who doesn't or refuses to resolve an ambiguity in a contract, in particular the authors, i.e. banks, etc., then they're liable to lose their rights under that contract. So if somebody says, hey, I don't understand some of this contract, the bank can say, oh, go get a PhD from my favorite economist. they have to answer you, right?
Right.
So there's a massive social divide. There's a systemic effect from this problem. It has nothing to do with the behavior or the moral acumen of people, but it has more to do with the systemic thing that people are unaware of, that there's a systemic dynamic going on that is constantly feeding back into our behavior. And we're responding because we're trying to be diligent and trying to do what we're supposed to do. And without knowing it, we're actually adding to the problem.
Right.
And if we fix this problem, there's a more credible basis for reward, status, and risk, and collective confidence and trust. So basically, once things are clearer and we understand them in a way that is unambiguous, then our use of the system will change, our behavior will change as a consequence, and the risk created by that problem will pretty much be eliminated. We'll be able to do more long-term planning versus short-term impulse management, because this is sort of a jump ahead, but if you understand the problem of money's misrepresentation, you realize that it's at the root of systemic instability of money in terms of its representation of value. And as a consequence, we tend to be operating on the imperatives and the impulses impulsively on the imperatives, the immediate imperatives of the money system without being able to really think ahead as we could if the system were stable.
Right.
Greater security, quality, and sustainability of life support. Once we understand money and it doesn't become the overriding concern of society, we're still using money as a reference of value, but we're not sort of enslaved by its imperatives. We can now start to realize that certain things we just don't touch, you know, like people can quality of food, that's, we don't touch that. People who housing has to be of a minimum quality and maintenance free as possible, not, you know, all sorts of things. In other words, not everything becomes a commodity.
Right.
And we don't have the impulse to amass wealth for the sake of it. We don't need to, but what we do need to is secure our life support. And of course, a much higher inclusion and social cohesion. And almost all of the big issues that we have today, at the root of them all is money. Who's going to pay for it, and what are the conditions that people impose to bring funds, etc. That whole thing would be sorted out enormously by clarifying money. So the goal is to answer this question in this project. The goal is how to define the exact technological role of money and provide a valid specification of its definition and uses that both experts and lay people can understand unequivocally. So basically what we want to do is tell the world, you know, we've checked, the experts have checked it out and they've done all their homework and they realize this is a good definition of money. As basically when you're talking about money, we're talking what the symbol represents, the dollar sign or whatever, and this is what it represents, and this is what it means to your life, and this is how it relates to your business, to your expectations in society, etc. And so you have a very clear understanding of money that is logically valid, and doesn't contain any misrepresentations or logical incongruences. And so you now you understand that, and we can state it in this simple way so that everybody can, you know, who's not an expert can still use it. And if they wish, they can, anybody, it's an open standard, so anybody can get their smart brother or uncle to come along and explain to them, this is why it's this way, etc. It's an open, clear thing. Right now, there is no definition, and the criteria for the use of money and the control of money is really in, I like to say, it's either hidden or occult, hidden or unknown criteria. In other words,
Right.
we actually don't know what we're doing, and if anybody does know what they're doing, it's kind of dark. And and there's no reason why we should stand for that, especially when we're signees and parties to contracts. So basically, the project requires the development of what are called formal requirements, then the development of the language. So the decidable ontology is essentially it's a collection of terms, but some of the terms might have their colloquial counterpart, but we've defined them in an unequivocal sense for the purpose of this project, so that there's no ambiguities. In other words, all of the terms that we use have a specific meaning, and the combination of those terms can't give rise to similar terms with different meanings. In other words, it's a very tight kind of formal depiction or a collection of definitions that are that process is quite involved, and it takes a lot of all of the stakeholders to speak of how they understand the terms, and so work it out, right? We did that with my international standards project, where we were able to make terms available to people to comment on, and it was pretty much the logic of the definitions that would clarify any conflicts there. So the formal requirements is to say, our problem statement, which is what we just sort of said here, the goal, how to define the exact technological role of money and provide a valid specification of its definition and uses that both experts and people can understand unequivocally. And then we say, what are the requirements to do that? So that's another bunch of logical statements that have to answer to that. And it might seem trivial, but when you actually get into into the work, it's not so trivial, but we have to develop formal requirements and also the requirements of the use. You know, we want to, it has to be available to everyone, you know, a whole series of things. And then decidable ontology, then dynamic systems testing, which is basically saying that if you have a logical system and you set it up and you operate on this ontology and these requirements and you're satisfying them, then how does it play out? And that's sort of working out how different problems may arise that you didn't see at the beginning, right?
Right.
So this is reiterative. You know, you do dynamic testing that goes back to check out your requirements, and you know, over a period of time and working on these things, you iron out all of the issues, and then eventually you get a stable result. And so when you've done that, when you're also doing this, you also have to take into consideration concurrent legal and financial evaluation and global take-up, which is basically letting people know what you're doing, letting people have the opportunity. It's an open forum, so people are invited to participate, so they're aware. Different stakeholders will say, "Oh, this is an interesting project. We should get involved because this affects us in this way and that way, and we want to make sure that our voice is heard in this or that way." So that concurrent legal and financial evaluation is something that we're doing as we're developing things, and then concurrent world outreach, which was the final point where the whole definition of money is becoming stable, the work has been well defined, and the results are let's say stable in a certain way, to use the term in a more colloquial term way. So formal, and once that's there, you need people to know that your project has done this, etc. And that outreach. This whole project we basically budgeted for about 60 at that time. It's I don't know, I mean, maybe 10 years ago, or no, less than 10 years ago, 2015, 7 years ago, and we budgeted it at around 60 million over a 6-year period, with offices in different parts of the world, so that anybody could, you know, there'd be an office in China and throughout the whole world to be able to participate and to liaise, if you will, with the world. And I think that's good enough for today.
Okay.
I mean, not for today, but I mean for that project, because that project is a project designed to get people thinking about it at a very high level, and it assumes that we have the kind of money which we don't have, and this project is not actually happening yet, not even at the scale that we thought we could. We might be able to do it had we won the support, right? The public or the financing support.
Okay. Now this
is still open for people who are interested in this project. We can do that, and it's a very valuable project because we've done all of the project management, and you know, we've really thought out every aspect of it in great detail. So we have a full project that we could present to somebody who wanted to invest in this, and at the same time allow them to tweak it or to participate or whatever, and maybe modify it for different levels of financial support. But the other very important point is that this is about how do we define money in a formal way, so blah, blah, blah. But the issue is that right now we know for sure that money is not defined. We also know it's misrepresented. That's unequivocally true. And it's having an immediate systemic effect. And that the dynamics of that systemic effect is running away with itself. And people are starting to get very hot-headed as to how to deal with this. And that has tremendously dangerous consequences for society. So we have what we called in our resolutions. So if we go back to the resolutions, we have two basic resolutions. The first is the money be formed, which is this project that I just described. But the other one is that the banking system, if you want to call it the money system, the banking system is already in a process of auto kind of reform. It has to constantly change its tactics and its behavior in a way to try and deal with the immediate circumstances in the economy. A large part of it is their own fault, although they may not be willing to admit it. The point is that we know that if we take a good analysis of the system right away, and we ensure that the system, in the formal sense of the term, is made passive,
Yes.
right? Then we know that the system will no longer be reaping havoc.
Exactly.
We can continue to use it, and as we point out, as I point out lower down here.
Wait. Before you go further, go back.
Yeah.
Could you click on the definition of passive, so we'll have an understanding?
Okay, passive.
Thank you.
Okay. So passive in the formal sense is from a system's point of view, it's where output never exceeds input. So in the case of banking, is that output is equal to input.
Okay.
Right. So a passive system where output is less than input is still passive, but in our case, we're dealing with a case where the output is equal to input, right? And this is important for its role as a reference of value. In other words, when you think about measure, right? Any system of measure is by definition a passive system.
Okay.
It's very hard for people to realize that things that we do every day and take for granted are formally defined in systems theory, and they have to be, right? And
can you give us an example so that our audience can have an idea of an example of that, perhaps?
Well, if for example, if you take a measure of something, right, that measure is never exact. So anyone who's done any kind of science will know that any measure you take has a margin of error.
Yes.
And you can determine the margin of error precisely because the system is passive. In other words, the system is not adding or subtracting anything from the measure itself. Right?
Exactly. Yes.
So what's an example? There are many examples in nature. For example, the way your body reads DNA is a passive system. The way your body produces ATP in cell metabolism is a passive system. And the simplest example is a score. If you're watching a football game, you define the unit score as putting a ball in the goal.
Yes.
And every time you record that, the process of recording doesn't in any way alter the measure itself. Right?
Exactly. Yes.
The recording is passive. It doesn't mean that recording is useless. It doesn't mean that recording is meaningless because it's not affecting, because we want to know what the score is so that we can know who's winning the game.
Yes.
But the scoring process itself is a passive system. It's useful. It has its function. It feeds back to the players to know I got to work harder, but it doesn't determine the results on the field directly.
Exactly.
And this is very, very important because if money is to be a representation of value and a representation of our value as people and workers and collaborators in society, as well as the goods and services we provide, we want to know that the measure of that value is not being affected either by the whim of other people, which is what we're very concerned with, but what unbeknownst to most people is that the money system itself is creating its own dynamic based on this misconception of money that is itself creating a dynamic of creating a bias, if you will. And one of the problems we have in society is that everybody's trying to put the blame of that bias on players.
Yes.
It never occurred to them that this money system is not an inert thing. It's an actual dynamic.
Yes.
And the question is, why is it a dynamic? And the reason it's the misrepresentation.
Good. So if you could go back to the screen
Yeah.
you had before,
Yes.
and then I think it's important while we have these next 12 minutes to maybe walk through the rest of this page to give people an understanding more about what you're doing. But the time is yours, Mark. So I'll leave it up to you to decide how we're going to proceed.
Okay. The basic concept or idea that said when we just left off was the fact that people don't realize, or it's hard for people who are not trained, and even trained people will just not bother to look at it this way. But the idea is that we're using systems that have a dynamic, right?
Okay.
And if that dynamic is if that system that is dynamically employed, if you will, is not passive, then you're going to have two possibilities. One is that it's a stable system, but it's an active system, right? And or it's unstable. Unstable systems are all active. They just go all over the place until the house comes down, right? And a stable active system has a predictable increment, a change in increment. For example, if the input's 1, it'll multiply it and make it 2, but it's never greater than 2, right? So for every input, you have a bounded input, 1, and for the output, you have double, which is 2, but it's also bounded. It doesn't go wherever it wants to. For the sake of measure, and for the sake of using money as a reference in a system where many, many transactions are going at the same time, and you want the net result to be stable, you have to take the precaution to make sure that it's not only just stable in the sense that output and input are bounded, but that it's also passive, i.e. output, if it's input 1, output's got to be 1. And that means you can't fiddle with that. You can't play with that. You can't use the inputs and outputs of that system to try and make people measure things more properly or value things more properly or whatever, which is essentially what people without training in systems will assume. Well, we can't just let everybody create money on their own because, they don't have the criteria, they don't know, and we have to direct it. And we have to make sure that we control the money supply so that they don't go crazy, so to speak. It's understandable, that proof, but it's wrong. And we can get into those concepts further along. It's not that immediate to understand, but essentially, if you want money to be a stable reference of value, it's got to be passive. And that is the key idea. Now, the concept of money's misrepresentation is important. And here we bring up two things, is that one is that there is no standard, which we already mentioned. So there is no proper formal representation of money, there's no definition. The definition is compulsory because money isn't something that abides by the laws of nature, so that we just have to figure out it's something we've invented. And if we want to apply money to our world, we have to do it in a reasoned way and in a way that's transparent and clear to everybody. But the misrepresentation of money is kind of sneaky, because it's intuitively very easy to fall into. In fact, historically, we could say that money's misrepresentation is something that evolved in human society more than it was a conscious conspiracy to dominate and fool everybody by an elite. I think the elite are not aware of what we're talking about, which is a great opportunity, because if we approach them with reason and logic, and it's the little guys now that have managed, because they're concerned about their families and their community, say, hey, wait a second, what the hell is this thing money? Let's get this clear, right? And we've got some simple concepts that make a lot of sense over here. Please answer, right? And this, it would help anybody to satisfy. But the misrepresentation is very subtle.
Yes. So is it possible for you to walk through the rest of the page in the next 8 minutes or not?
Yeah, well, there's no need for that. I mean, this is more detailed. This is for somebody to study the resolutions and the reasons for them. We've talked about passivity, but I would like to get the core misrepresentation clear.
Okay.
And I think that this would be great to get across to people, because like we mentioned with the score as a passive system, we can use that model. It's the one that I've used. Some people have other models, but they're pretty much all have the same end result. Basically, if you think about a football game, right? The score is very clearly laid out what it is. The score is when the ball, according to the rules, when the ball goes into the net, according to the rules, then it's a score, and then that goes up on the scoreboard, right? So each of our accounts are like a scoreboard, a record of our score, right? And now, if we think that the actual goal score was a token, right, of something that we needed to have before we could score, right? Then we'd have to say to ourselves, we'd have the problem of the conundrum of having to say, okay, I want to score, but I don't know how much I'm going to score in this. I'm going to be playing Chicago today, and I don't know. I don't know if we're going to score. I don't know, but I bet we score 3, right? So you say, okay, we score 3, and you say, okay, so let's go borrow three goals, right? And if we score 3, great. Then that means that we're all set. But if it turns out that we score 4, but we only borrowed 3, we won't be able to record 4. And if we score 2 instead of 3, right, we'd owe 1, and we'd have to give back that extra score in some future game we play, right? If we were to do that, the league would gradually move away from how to play the game, soccer in this case I was thinking of, but move away from soccer and towards some kind of weird kind of game of goal management and et cetera, et cetera. And that's essentially the example that I like to use in colloquial terms.
Okay.
We need to work at ensuring that money is a valid representation of value, right?
Yes.
And in a way that we know that's all it is. If we do not use money for any other purpose but that, then we're free to make a lot of our decisions that we cannot really make without bias or unwarranted bias when money is not just a measure of value, but it's the essential enabler of everything we do. So our proposal is to provide a stable standard of money that's scientifically validated, that everybody can understand, and that doesn't do anyone any harm, but is useful for keeping track of who did what and who brought value, who didn't. And there's a lot more to this than just what we just described, but I think that if people capture that, they'll at least know that we have a very worthy goal that is not being pursued by the current standard or whatever. So does that wrap it up? I pass the mic to you.
If you could stop sharing your screen, then perhaps we can,
yes,
in fact.
Yes. Okay, great.
Yeah, so Marc Gauvin, thank you so very much. I think that was very instrumental. Now, is it possible for you to share with our listeners, or our viewers, I should say, a way to reach you if they want to follow up with a conversation with you about this, or should we direct them to your website, or both?
Okay, well, they can access at community. So the word community at moneytransparency.com. And that's the general purpose, and either I or someone else will respond.
Excellent. So in general, though, if people go to your website, there's a place there for contacts. That's
yes. You can also make contacts. Yes.
Great. Okay.
Right.
Well, we have actually a whole 30 seconds left, Marc.
Let's wrap it up. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Marc Gauvin. This is Andrew Williams Jr., and hopefully we'll see you next week at the same time. Marc, thank you so much.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about what we talk about then. Okay, great.
I love it. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you very much. All the best.
Bye-bye.